Hello and welcome to KDVG Studios.
Hello.
Today, we are going to actually be talking about folklore, myths, and fairy tales. And as per usual, Katie and I are probably going to take slightly different looks at these particular topics. But it was something when we were discussing, hey, what's our next topic going to be? It was the one thing that sort of sparked for both of us. So we are welcome you along for the ride. We would love to hear your comments or thoughts on it if you're willing to share. And please keep in mind, if there are any particular topics you would love to hear us talk about, let us know. Okay, so to get us started, I was just telling Katie earlier that this is the time before my birthday. And when we are talking energy cycles, I am currently in the trough of my energy cycle. So I am going to
She is everybody. I can attest to it.
So it may not seem, I don't necessarily talk that much slower continuously or anything, but it might
Oh no,
take
it
me
doesn't stop her talking. No. And the stories sort of
I'm
hazily connected. They're still going.
they're still
Don't
going. I just
worry.
have a harder time remembering how they relate to
Yes.
whatever it is that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to ask respectfully for Miss Miller to kick us off with her initial take on this.
Okay, thank you so much. So when I thought of this folklore, I was thinking the representation of women in folklore, which I thought was kind of an interesting topic. And then I thought it's a good opportunity to look into Shinto stories since I'm half Japanese. And evidently, I didn't even realize May is Asian American Pacific Islander month. Did you know that? I didn't know that. I just got
I
an
have
email about it today.
I have vague memories of having potentially known this at one
Right.
time in my life, but it is not something that has retained a presence in my brain. So the fact that
Yeah.
there is an AAPI month is something I'm aware of, but the fact that it's
Yes.
May was not connected.
Thought it was later for some reason, but I also don't know how to keep track of these months. So if anyone knows how to do that, please let me know. But anyway, I received an email 30 minutes ago saying it's that month. So actually, it fits in quite well with one of my stories. So I've chosen the representation of female goddesses in Shinto myth. And I also took the pantheon from the Sami mythology. Not that we don't know if I have any Sami in me, but I'm just going with it for now. I know for sure I am half Japanese. So, and I just thought it would be interesting because they're both animist religions. And I
Well, the
wanted
one thing
to, yeah.
I just wanted to reinforce is you did tell me once that your grandmother had said, or your uncle had said that he thought your grandmother was of
No, it
Sami
was
descent.
my cousin, she thought,
Your
but that
cousin,
was
your cousin.
based because
Okay.
we did our DNA tests and she thought it's possible because our some DNA thing is up north, Scandinavia, and actually my grandmother Norwegian side are from the far north. So it's
Got it.
certainly possible. There's some blood in there. But so I've looked at the Japanese Shinto, which is
Mhm.
the pre-Buddhist religion, and it's the indigenous religion of Japan, and then kind of comparing it to the Sami animists. Um, and I don't know much about it, so it was an interesting exercise for me.
Yeah.
My main finding, just to start it, is the sun gods are both female in
Oh, wow.
mhm, mhm, mhm.
That's,
Because usually, like in Western European, it's always usually male, right? But
yeah.
yeah, not in Shinto. Actually, female for sure in Shinto, female goddesses. It's so they're the powerful, they're the creators. Obviously there are male gods around, but they're sort of in the spaces created by the female goddesses. So briefly, the story is so the world was created by this couple, Izanami and her husband. They created the Japanese islands using a jeweled spear. So I don't know, they must have been poking the spear into the sea. So Izanami, the main goddess, the creator goddess, she is the mother of all the other gods and the islands and the mountains, um, and the sea. Then, interesting story, she dies in childbirth. I don't know how this happens. She was giving birth to the fire god and she died. So then she had to go to the underworld, which was called the Yomi, the underworld. And her body was decomposing down in the underworld. Her husband, the other creator god, went down to go get her, to bring her back, which sounds very similar to what's that story with the
Persephone.
no, the other
No,
the Ovid's no, Dante's.
Dante's
Remember
Inferno.
Orpheus goes down to get his wife or girlfriend, and he has to go through the gates, rings of hell, and he gets her, and Hades says, "You can take her, but don't look back." And at the last minute, he looked back, and he had to leave her. Orpheus, I don't know. Anyway, it sounds a little bit like that. So the husband went to get the wife, but he wasn't supposed to look at her decomposing body, and he did. So he was thrown out of Yomi, and it's become the goddess of death at that point, and she vowed to kill 1,000 people a day, and so he vowed to create 1,500 lives a day to counteract. So she goes from creator to destroyer, which also, isn't that like
That's
the
like Kali.
Indian? Yes, yes, yes. It's
But what's
very
interesting
interesting.
is a male creator god in an animist, like, though
Yeah,
she's the
there are a
original.
couple.
She's the original, um, but then it's almost like it gets flipped.
Yeah. And then he comes out of the underworld and he has to purify himself because he was down there, right? So he's washing his eyes and his face and everything. And out of his left eye, the goddess Amaterasu, the sun goddess, is born. Then the moon comes out of his uh, other eye. And then the storm god comes out of his nose. So you've got the three he top gods, all born out of his face, kind of by accident when he was purifying himself. Um, so
Isn't
Amaterasu,
Artemis also born out of, like, Zeus's head?
I think a lot of them came out of, yeah, I think
Well, I
it's
think
like
it's because
seems to
he.
be a theme with these
Yeah. Anyways,
people.
please.
So Amaterasu is the sun goddess, and she is the one that the imperial family, the imperial family is supposed to be descended from.
Oh, wow.
Um, and that gives them their legitimacy. So she's the line, which is very interesting because in Japan, no female can be em- emperor, empress. It has to go through the male line, even though their legitimacy comes from the sun goddess. The mediators with the goddess were female. They're called the Miko. And like kind of shaman women, priestesses or something. Before Buddhism and Confucianism came over from China, it was a very female, like they had a lot of power in the communities. Um, and it was this patriarchal, male centered Buddhism, Confucianism that pushed women out of all of the ritual spaces and created this patriarchal situation. Interesting.
That's actually really similar to when you look at what we know of or have been able to piece together about the Taino. And
Hmm.
actually, even what you and I have talked about before about the native and indigenous people of the Americas in general often had more, um, I don't know if it's power, but definitely religious and importance placed
Hmm.
on women or with women.
Mhm.
and where they could be the shaman. A lot of times they were the people considered the intermediaries between like
Mhm.
humans and the gods. So for Japan, you had it coming over from China. Well,
Mhm.
for the Americas, you had at least the influx that is current memory is the influx when they started coming more regularly from Europe, because there are stories about um, like the northern seafaring folks having come like hundreds of years before Columbus. And there are proof and artifacts of people from Africa having come also before.
Are there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Where? What?
I would have to go back and look, but I know
Yeah.
when I was looking at some of the stuff, they were talking about how um, there was this concept that the Africans didn't sail. And actually, in conversations that some of the conquistadors and stuff had with people, and some of like when they looked at some of the weapons and stuff, or even the plants that had come over, a lot of it is ascribed to having been part of the slave trade. But some of those plants had made it over to the New World from Africa way before the slave trade was in full swing. So that's where I recall hearing about it. But I don't have a specific sort of like, here's the archaeological or anthropological study that I read about it. I just tend to read so many different things that come through. And it was one of the ones that I happened upon
I have
a couple
never
years ago.
heard that,
Yeah.
actually.
And
I
again,
mean, I heard because I just did an Andes, well, it was the Americas archaeology, but it was very focused on the Andes, so we didn't talk about anything else. But we do have now that because you mentioned agriculture,
mhm,
because I guess this, yeah, maybe it's the yam. Polynesians obviously were sailors.
mhm.
I mean, everybody knows. And they did come over, but it wasn't like a mass
No,
thing. It
it
was like
wasn't a.
a few boats once in a while, boom. But I had not heard about Africa.
Yeah, there were 2 elements that were considered proof, and I don't know that it is a generally accepted. It was one of those things that it's a hypothesis based on things that they were seeing, and also stuff that was written in whatever written records were able to come out. And like the
Mm.
Polynesians, I do not believe this was any sort of coming and settling other than a few people
Mm.
who maybe got left or decided to stay because they didn't want to go back on the big water. It
Mm.
wasn't like the invasion of the Europeans or anything like that. It
Yeah,
was
yeah.
exploratory. It was some trading.
Mm.
Um, and again, I don't know that it's generally accepted in all. It was one of
I'm
those
gonna look
things
it
that I
up.
read. Okay. I thought it
It's
was
very
interesting, and
interesting.
I was
Yeah,
like,
it is interesting.
just considering how often, history is written by those who are in power, and how often things that we know happened have been dismissed. When I remember reading about that, to me, it made sense. Whether or not we have the scientific proof that goes back, it just made sense that if these people sailed the ocean blue, the wind might have blown them off of their normal course, and it might have been easier to go to the closest land, kind of thing. I don't know enough about sailing to have any idea if that
Well,
was
there
real.
are currents that carry,
Mhm.
and I can't I know, I think there is something in the Atlantic toward the Caribbean. So maybe
Mhm.
if they were sailing and then they hit that and they got shoved over,
Well, yeah, you have it comes
it's
down,
possible.
goes down and comes up the side and around, which is why, if I
Mm.
remember right, I believe the coast of South America on the Atlantic side is colder, while on the north it kind of comes down and around the other way.
Mm.
Or no, up and around. Yeah, same thing, up and around. So it's warmer on the
Mm.
North American coast. So, like, if
Mm.
you go to the Jersey Shore, for example, which is north of
Mhm.
California, you can actually go in the water in the summer. It's warmer than even
Mm.
summer water on the West Coast, because in the Pacific, it's coming down from above.
Oh, right, right, right.
So that much I remember, but exactly which ways they go, I don't know. But it just makes me think of the fact that you had women, even in Europe, like if you think about the priestesses for in some of the temples, even in the Greek myth and
Oh, yes,
folklore,
yes, yes.
pantheon,
Yep,
you
yep.
that by the time you get to the Romans are kind of being, or maybe a little past the Romans, are being pushed out. And then, most of what is accepted as the Bible in modern times has done a lot to not mitigate, but to downplay the power of women. I don't know that much, but my understanding is not all of that is true depending on which avenues of the Jewish faith you follow. There's still a lot, like they definitely do a matriarchal in order to be Jewish
Mhm.
truly by blood. It's through the mother kind of thing.
Yep.
And my understanding is Islam has something, I don't know exactly, but I think in the West there's a misinterpretation, or there's an interpretation based on, it would be like somebody interpreting Christianity based on, fundamentalist Christian doctrine,
Mhm.
like, but there's other forms of it. And that's sort of the way that Islam has been interpreted by, if not all, at least much of the West, as by the people who have taken out the power of women from those
Mhm.
roles. But I always think of like Mary Magdalene, who, even if you take the current writings, she's the person that risen Christ appeared to. She's the first disciple. But
Mm.
for much of modern history, she's been called a whore and
Yes.
like
I think that's the
never called a
church, though.
disciple. Yeah, and never called a disciple at all. Like, so this
Yeah.
aspect of a patriarchal overlay on the power of women in folklore, in fairy tale, in myth, in religion is a throughput in a
I think
lot
the
of.
church really hated women, or really tried to push women down for sure. And actually, very interesting in Japan because um, there was quite a lot of, evidently from what I read, a lot of power amongst women and these kind of shaman ladies. And there was a queen in 200 AD ish, something like that. Her name was Himiko. And I don't know if you know, because there was a Lara Croft Tomb Raider movie about it. Do you
No
remember
way.
the last one? Yes.
I don't think I saw the last one. I saw the one with,
Long time.
well, I saw one with Angelina Jolie.
This is
And
the
I
one
know that there's,
after with Alicia. What's her
yeah,
face?
okay. I've seen that one exists, but I never saw that movie.
Because I really like Lara Croft, like the games and the movies and everything.
Yeah,
So she did the Alicia lady. She did the movie, and it is about Himiko and some treasure. And so
of course.
they go to Japan and wander, get stuck in a storm in the islands, and then find her tomb. So no one knows where the tomb is, but Himiko was actually a real person, and talking about being erased from history. So there's two very important texts from the 700s AD in Japan, and they both talk about Amaterasu, the goddess, and the myths. And also historical. It talks about previous rulers, but it's partly, I think, to connect the imperial family to create that line to legitimize them as the emperor and so Himiko is not in that, which is interesting. But the reason we know about her, it's from the Chinese texts at the time.
So the same
The
time period, but the Chinese text.
uh, Chinese text from her time period,
Okay.
280,
Oh,
500
okay.
years
Okay.
before it, because she was a queen in this place called Yamatai, and no one knows where that is exactly. But she had a treaty with China, and that's why she's in the Chinese historical docket texts. And they wrote quite a bit about her. So I guess it was like a wartime. There were warring polities in Japan, and she was elected to take over this area called Yamatai. So she wasn't born into it. They elected her because supposedly all the men were fighting and there was no peace. So they thought, okay, let's get this woman in. And they think she was a shaman priestess lady um, for the worship of Amaterasu. And she evidently had like 1,000 female attendants, probably also shaman priestesses to help her. The day-to-day running of this area was by her brother. So he was doing the actual business and she wouldn't see anybody. So she was closed off. She had one man, her assistant, and that's how her messages would get out. Everything was running, was crops were fine, taxes were paid, blah, blah, blah. There was no fighting. Then I think there was some other guy wanted to take over. And so there was another war, but I think she died and then the kingdom fell apart again. No one could unify Yamatai together. And then they put like a 13-year-old girl in there as the head of Yamatai. But they think she was also shaman. Then there was peace. So I don't know if this is a story of, you know, promoting the female shaman rulership, but there was a treaty with China at the time. So obviously something real was happening at this point. But she is nowhere in the text for Japan. So the 700s, the two texts that were written in Japan was after Buddhism and Confucianism came in, because that was the 6th century, I think. So 500, somewhere like that. So they may have been downplaying women's leadership to boost up the male emperor and his line.
Your comment about the 10 or 13 or whatever year old being put in place just took me to the Star Wars thing again, where Padma is supposed to be like 14 when we first meet her,
Oh,
when she's the
right.
queen of Naboo.
Yes. Yep.
And it's supposed to be somewhat ceremonial, but she actually goes into the political. Anyways, it just made me wonder. I'm like, I wonder if these stories make it into what Jung might have called the collective unconscious. And you still have even male authors bringing them forth in new
Or
ways.
they heard the story because Himiko is
Or they heard
quite
the story.
famous story. Yeah.
I have
It's
no
it's
idea what
a
Lucas might or might not have
I mean
consumed. I mean, he was in California.
he was clearly
That's
interested
creepy.
in other cultures because he was
Yes.
looking at Hopi hair design and Mexican revolutionaries. So I
And being in
imagine.
California, plenty of whether it's Chinese or Japanese or
Mm,
anywhere from the Asian subcontinent,
yeah,
uh,
yeah.
Asian continent, sorry. Um, it
Hmm.
might have been something that he stumbled across,
So
or
Himiko
or
is quite
Philip.
famous and it's mysterious because she's not in the text and they don't know where Yamatai was exactly. It's a little bit of a conundrum. Some people think it's up north where there's a place area called Yamato. Well, who knows? But then others think because in the Chinese text, it says that China gave her 1,000 bronze mirrors and interestingly, near Nara, the old capital, um, there are big tumuli or burial mounds, and they've found some bronze mirrors. So they might be near Nara, which that would fit in well into this narrative of if you are not anti-woman and you can trace, because clearly she was a worshiper of Amaterasu and very important in her day. So, if it was near Nara, that is the old imperial homeland seat, whatever.
Where is Nara in relation to, like, Kyoto and Tokyo?
It's like, Kyoto is, like a train ride away.
From
So
Nara?
mhm, they're
Okay.
close. Mm. Tokyo is
Is
the
it
only one that's a bit quite further up.
okay, okay. Just trying to get a I understand we don't know exactly where she ruled, but
Yeah,
if it
very
might be
interesting.
Nara, having a sense of, like, where Nara is.
Near
Yeah,
Kyoto. So it was
okay.
Nara was a capital, and then Kyoto was the capital for many, many, many centuries, and then it moved up to Edo, which is Tokyo now. But that was quite later. But there's other hypotheses of where it is, but I think the burial mounds and the bronze mirrors are a little bit interesting hints.
Yeah.
Mm.
I mean, the question being, did they bury people far from where they lived or closer to?
Well,
Do you know what I mean? Like, some I
yeah,
don't
yeah,
know,
I
but,
mean, it's
like,
a good question. That's usually wouldn't be far, but depends, I guess. If it's an area that they considered sacred, you maybe would travel far
yeah,
to bury someone, but it's from I think from something called the Kofun period, and it's very specific types of mounds. They're like shaped like keyholes. They're very famous, and no one's sure, but they think quite important people were buried there. There's a few, and then they stopped doing it. So it's not like they're all over the place. Um, I
hmm,
don't know too much about it because I can't find a East Asian archaeology class to take. If anyone knows one, please let me know.
yeah. I would have you looked at any of the Japanese universities?
Well, I can't take it in Japanese, but yes, I have looked. Yes.
Gotcha. Okay.
I have looked, and then there was an archaeologist I met a week or 2 ago, and she was Greek, also looking, and neither of us could find it yet.
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 Yet. Hey, an idea out there for you guys. Any professors out there with a specialty or even just PhDs
Yes,
might have the opportunity to start a class. You already
that
it
would
sounds
be
like you already
very
have at
nice.
least 2 and maybe
Mhm,
more students ready
mhm.
to
Oh,
sign up
yes, there are
and
some
take
from
it
my
virtually.
class right now who would do it too.
See?
Just saying,
There you go.
we're open.
Um, all right. Do you want to go into the Sami one, or would you like me
Oh,
to
you go ahead.
I'm happy to go.
We can have a break from my goddesses.
Okay. I took a slightly different tack when I was thinking about the concept of folklore, myth, and fairy tale. Um, it wasn't until we started talking really that I thought about it in terms of um, like actual things that people tell. I for some reason I'd keyed in on the concept of fairy tale. Though folklore and myth were in there. And I was really interested in some of this we've touched on before about especially female authors, though there are male authors out there as well,
Mm, mhm,
retelling stories that maybe we're really familiar with, but in ways that might be deemed modern. Um, and a lot of them are doing things like shifting the viewpoint where, if you think about, for example, the first of Disney's stories that came out was Snow White of these
mhm.
tellings, right? Well,
Yep.
she's not the narrator. It's not told from her point of view. It's like somebody else is watching her life. So like some of these authors shift the viewpoint. So it is the
Mm,
main character, the female main character who becomes the narrator of it. It's kind of like a reclaiming of her voice.
it makes
Uh,
sense though. Yeah.
yeah,
Mm,
it's like one of the easiest shifts that you see some of them
mhm.
do, and I'm not saying what they're doing is easy. I'm just saying that that's one of the easiest shifts to do is to center these women as
Yes.
opposed to have them be somebody who is looked at or, I don't know, co-opted by somebody else
Mhm.
even. They're reworking endings and
Mm.
sometimes they're inserting contemporary political, sexual, and intersectional concerns in the narratives. I touched on this a little bit, but rather than passively inheriting archetypes, sort of like in so many stories, whether this is books that we've read or movies that we've seen. But like when you think about like, for example, I'll just think about the books that we were required to read in high school, for example. There were very few that were written by women. In fact,
Mm.
I am at pains to think of anything other than the yellow wallpaper in this moment that was written by a woman. I'm not saying there weren't women who we were required to read in high school. I'm saying I'm just at pains to remember. Like
I can't
even
even
one of
remember what I read in high school.
I
Do you?
remember some stuff. Yeah, I remember
Oh,
distinctly Tess of the D'Urbervilles because I
oh,
hated it.
wow.
Um, I remember The Wizard of Oz, also written by a man. I remember, even though
Oh,
you have technically female main characters, The Great Gatsby.
oh
Uh,
yeah. I think we read that.
those are the ones
Wow,
that
I
are.
don't remember.
I mean, there's also The Grapes of Wrath, by
Oh, I never
Steinbeck.
read that
I
at
had
all.
an American literature course, so that's where we read that one. Um, And it was tied to our American history course. So, we'd go through different parts of
Mm-hmm.
American history and also read literature from the time period. And it was taught by a lesbian couple for me who were amazing. They were amazing. And I know I I would be shocked if we did not have female authors that we had to read, but it was our AP courses and
Mm,
they had to prep us for the advanced placement test. Well, they were
yeah.
not in control of what was on the advanced placement test. So even though I know for a fact, I cannot remember them, but I know for a fact they tried to get us to read women were not on that test.
Yep. Yep.
So it wasn't what stuck with me, I guess, kind of things. But like the retelling of these things, like moving away from these archetypes, and I think of this a lot in movies, like the damsel, especially the damsel in distress, the wicked stepmother, the
Mm-hmm.
faithful wife, like these female archetypes that even in the tellings of these stories are most often viewed from a male perspective. Um, so often in what has been deemed sort of, I don't know, high literature kind of thing. Like even if you think about Shakespeare, like it's still a male perspective of these women. And so you have a lot of these modern authors retelling these stories. And part of what they're doing is they interrogate the power structure of the archetypes. Um, and in doing so, they support and retell stories so that women are agents. They're the active person. The story is about them. It may be from their perspective, but even beyond that, even if they're telling it from a different perspective, it's their agency. And they also, I think, expand the moral complexity of the bearers. So they're not black or white. I think so often in movies, TV, books, we've gotten to see full breadth of from good to bad to just complex of male characters. And I'm not
Yes.
saying
Yep.
we're seeing that with women, um, but as a woman of color, I would say we've begun to see it a little bit more with white women. And I still feel like we are in search of seeing it a bit more when it comes to women of color in our literature and stuff. But there is some lit that exist of this nature. And I'll get into some of that. But I want to touch on some of the other things that is happening in terms of these retellings. And we talked about one of them before, which was the retelling of the Medusa story kind of thing. So you have a change in the narrator that puts women or multiple women at the center of the story. So it's told from her interior perspective. So again, normally if you're the one telling the story, it's not necessarily black and white. It's not necessarily good or bad. It's like, I did this because, even if that thing was bad or even if that thing was good, you have the why of it in there as opposed to being observed from the outside. The other thing that a lot of these authors are doing is they recover the silenced or minor characters and give them voice. Um, and I will say you have some men doing this as well. I've mentioned The Wizard of Oz before with Wicked, which I have to say I really did not like the book, but it did give voice to somebody who had been more of a minor character. Like we didn't know her interior world. It gave us a
Who?
concept.
Who is
The
it?
Wicked Witch of the
Sorry, I
West,
never saw it. Oh, Wicked. Oh, is
the
that
Broadway
the
show and the movie.
is that the mean one or the nice one? Glenda?
Well, if you read the book, see the movie, or the play, you might have a different interpretation of who's mean and who's nice. I'll put it to
Okay,
you this
but
way. The
who
Wicked
is it?
Witch of the West is the green one. How's that?
With the monkeys, flying monkeys.
Yes.
Oh. Oh, it's
And
from
so
her perspective?
yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know anything about Wicked.
And I think the difference is that it's not actually told, she's not the narrator of it, but it's her story.
Oh.
So you get a
Oh, that's
sense of what
interesting.
her backstory is and how she became who she's presented to be, and how it's not all,
Oh.
she's not wicked in the sense that we might have named her.
Right.
She's doing things for a particular
Hence
reason.
the title. Got it.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
They rework endings, the moral lessons are transformed. Who's rewarded, who's punished. Endings are sometimes more ambiguous. Maybe something that is viewed as a justified punishment is no longer viewed as justified punishment, but is viewed as unjust or unjust based on learning more about the story. They reclaim monsters and figures. They treat witches, sirens, ogres, and others as responses to oppression, not innate evil. They historicize and politicize. They link the myth, the patterns to patriarchy, colonialism, race, class, and sexual violence. They blend genres and media. So sometimes you'll find them using lyrics or speculative fiction, memoir, or hybrid forms of folklore to speak to the modern experience. And then they also re-mythologize identity intersectionally, foreground race, sexuality, disability, and indigeneity in retellings and new myths. And I just want to make a point here that a lot, when we're talking about these retellings, like if you're talking about Disney, yeah, race existed in the current constructs. But when some of these, especially older myths, like stuff that was written before, were written, there was no concept of race the way we think about it. There might have been concepts of religion, like what religious or ethnic background people had, but they didn't have necessarily the concept of race or colorism that we find in the modern world. Not saying it didn't exist at all, just saying it didn't exist in the way it
But
exists now.
I don't think you could have the same because there's been different historical events that have
Mhm.
shaped, but I would say there definitely would have been. People are people. You see a
Yeah,
brown person or whatever, you'll note it.
yeah, yeah.
Now,
You know
how
differences.
it's but their context is completely different from our context. It's not even, I would say, relatable, really.
Yeah. And so that's
Yeah.
why a lot of times the retellings make it maybe easier for a modern person to digest. There's
Mm.
some people who can read the old version or the translated old version and get into it. And there are other people for whom that's just not a space they can easily imagine, even with the words, but when
Oh,
there's a
a
retelling of
reader,
it.
someone
Yeah, a
reading
reader.
it.
Someone reading it, a lot of times these retellings give it a way to make it into the modern or into the
Did you
current.
read Medusa?
I have not. I have
I
not read
read
it.
part of Circe. Circe is
Mm,
part of this genre
mhm,
where they've someone, I don't know who wrote it. That's a woman, and she took a minor character in, I think it's in the Odyssey. She's a goddess, like a minor,
mhm.
you know, and it's about her, and she I think she's seen negatively in the original text, but this is her story. She's narrating it, and it's about how
Isn't
she
she Medusa's mother?
sees everybody. I don't know who. I didn't finish the book
Oh, I
actually,
believe
so
I believe Circe is
I
Medusa's
got
mother.
halfway.
But Madeline Miller is one
Oh.
of the people I was thinking about. She takes a marginal mythic figure, and makes her the protagonist, exploring autonomy, motherhood, and the cost of power.
Okay, so I did not read when she got, because she was not pregnant. She was not having a nice time on this island by herself, but she was, I think, banished or something happened to her, and she that's why she was living all alone on this island, and then people would come. So, and I think she had some ghosts.
I have not read it. I've heard about it. In
Mm.
fact, she's on my list. I was gonna go through a few of the women who've been
Mm.
doing this. So the first one that's come up, I did a few different kind of asking the question a couple different ways to see which way I most liked. And one of the women who came up each time, and I haven't read this, is a woman named an author named Angela Carter. She wrote The Bloody Chamber, which is a gothic erotic fairy tale retelling that exposes the male violence and reframes female sexuality and agency. So I was like, okay,
What is she retelling? Do you know?
I think Snow White, if I remember right.
Oh, right.
I think,
Okay.
but I'm not 100% sure. Margaret Atwood, who's famous for The Handmaid's Tale,
Oh,
but
yeah, I
she
don't like
actually
her.
did. But I actually have really enjoyed interviews with her. I've had no interest in
I
that
do not like
particular
her books.
story. No, no, no. I've made it to like maybe page 2 of The
I
Handmaid's Tale.
can't. It's the way she writes. I cannot get into
Well,
it.
for those who do enjoy her, she has one called Penelopead, the Penelopead. It
Mm.
has many short works and retells myth, like from the Odyssey, from Penelope's viewpoint, interrogating loyalty, storytelling, and silencing.
Yeah, because Penelope's sitting there weaving
Yeah.
for decades,
So
waiting for him.
this is one of those times when I at least have to say that I'm aware that the author herself is problematic, but for the longest time, her book was my favorite book. So I can't talk about myths and folklore without mentioning
Oh,
The Mist of Avalon by Marion Zimmer Bradley,
yes.
where she retells the Arthurian legend from the women's perspective, especially Morgan Le Fay, reframing religion, power, and gender. And for me, this was my intro into this type of retelling of the story. So I understand if people do not want to. I read it before any of what has come to light about her was, I think, generally publicly available. At least it wasn't available to 15-year-old me. I had no idea when I first read this book. But it was the retelling. It was the putting the women at the center. It was such a classic guy's tale that, I mean, even
Mm,
Disney had done it, but told from the perspective of powerful women and what the
mhm, mhm,
patriarchy ultimately did to them. And I just found it empowering
mm.
to read. So, another woman, Anne Sexton, she
Oh,
has
yeah.
one of the books. She has a number of different ones. In fact, she
Mhm.
goes on. I know Anne Sexton actually wrote additional versions of like the Mists of Avalon. Like Avalon kind of goes into a series, and if I remember right, Anne Sexton
Oh,
writes some of the books in that series. Anyways,
oh.
Transformations. It's a poetic psychological retelling that stripped, sanitized moral away and reveals traumatic adult dimensions. Exactly what that one's about, I do not
What
know.
does that even mean?
I don't know. That one, I don't know. But I have read Anne Sexton, and I can't remember which books off the top of my head,
Mm.
but I do remember enjoying them. Carol Ann Duffy, The World's Wife, poems that flip canonical male-centered myths and give comic, bitter, or tragic female takes. And I don't know who wrote them, but there were politically correct fairy tales. There were these thin little volumes that I remember getting, I think at Barnes and
Mm.
Noble in like, I don't know, late 90s, early 2000s. And I remember they just made me laugh out loud because they did exactly what it's describing Carol Ann Duffy doing, which was just,
Mm,
I mean, it was comic, it was bitter, it just was funny.
mm.
Kate Forsyth actually wrote something called Bitter Greens, a historically grounded retelling of Rapunzel that centers the authorial and matrilineal line of storytelling. That's interesting.
What does that mean?
I think it's authorial. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's
Mm.
it's the idea that um, who tells the story has an
Mm.
impact on how the story is told.
Mhm.
And so if you have the mother or telling the story or the woman telling the story, it's a
The
different story.
perspective. Mhm.
Yeah. Um, okay, I feel like I'm gonna butcher this name. Nendi Ok Oka Okorafor. Okorafor wrote Who Fears Death / Lagoon. It blends West African myth and futurism and centers Black women's resilience and the politics of survival.
It's interesting.
Something that I've been seeing on TikTok that I'm really liking is um, stories that are retelling, that are not even retelling, that are telling Black women's joy and sexuality and fun. I feel like so often when we take a book seriously about women in general, and I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but for a while there, it felt like if a female character needed a serious storyline, she was going to be raped. And
Oh,
because,
yes, you have mentioned this. Yes.
yeah, it just felt like, yes, 1 in 4 women have experienced this. It is serious. It is important to
Mm.
cover. But I'm like, there's so many other things that happen in women's lives that could be the award winning thing. And I guess I just like other stories to be told. Leanne Beta Betaso Betasa Mosake Simpson. I duly apologize for the butchering of that. Islands of Decolonial Love and Later Works, Indigenous Stories and Reclamations that
Hmm,
reinsert Indigenous women's knowledge into mythic frameworks. That one I had not heard of, but
that's interesting.
Toni Morrison,
Oh, yeah.
songlines, mythic reverberations in novels like Beloved, uses
Mm.
African and African American folklore to cast new moral cosmologies about trauma, motherhood, and survival. Naomi and Toni Morrison is just, I don't have the words. This is where I'm feeling slow. She is an American icon, amazing writer. Naomi Alderman, The Power, uses speculative mythic premise to invert gendered power dynamics and examine how power corrupts. That one sounds interesting. And then Marissa Meyer, The Lunar Chronicles, young adult reworking of fairy tales that foreground autonomy, consent, and alliance rather than marriage as salvation. So those are, I wanted to list out some, and from this list, I have a few. The Lunar Chronicles are something that I've run across before. I often like reading young adult stuff. Um, and I've been thinking about reading them. I haven't read them yet. Um, but I think that there's so much more out there that we don't get to hear about. Like, I'm not saying these are never covered because obviously Toni Morrison has been covered, but the fact that I haven't heard about Islands of Decolonial Love and Later Works, I'm like, I don't always listen to PBS, I'm not, but
Mm.
I'm like, who's talking about these kinds of books? Who's reviewing them and
Mm.
sharing them with us? Who are the reviewers, And what's nice about social media is I actually see a lot of just what we'd consider our normal, regular folks, regular women talking about the books that they've enjoyed,
Yep.
which I think is awesome.
Yep.
Um, It's not something I do very often, but in looking at this, I was just like, I was interested in who's telling those kinds of stories. By that I mean the stories that center women, but are based on folklore, mythology, and yeah.
It's a good segue into my Sami
Oh, right. Let's go.
because exactly what you're saying. So the Sami were in northern Scandinavia and Russia and Finland. So they're at the top, the Arctic, uh, nomadic, pastoral. They herd reindeer. Because reindeer are the center of their lives. They've been around for quite a while. Um, and then Christianity came in. So the only chronicles we have of the Sami history are by these Christian folk who wrote everything down. And so obviously you have to take everything with a little bit of a grain of massive boulders of salt because these are Christians at the time that were very anti anything indigenous, anti anything non Christian, and I think as a result, quite anti women, let's be honest so all of these stories are being written by these Christian men. The Sami are very similar to Shinto, so it was very female focused. The very powerful gods were female. So there is very briefly there is the Great Mother, I'm not even going to try to say this woman's name, Mataraka. And she is she's greatly revered and worshipped. So what she does is, so there's the sky god, and the male, evidently in Sami myth, the males are, there is a hierarchy with the male at the top. But the male gods are very distant. They're not engaged in the day-to-day life like the female goddesses are. So they've got the sky god, and he creates a soul. And then he gives the soul to the Great Mother. She puts it in a body. Okay. Then if it's a girl, she gives, so she has three daughters, the Great Mother. If it's a girl, baby girl, she gives it to one daughter. If it's a baby boy, she gives it to another daughter. And then that is placed into the womb of a human woman. So her job is to take the soul from the sky god and then attach a body to it. Um, then her three daughters, you've got this woman, goddess Sáráhkká. She's the cleaving woman. I don't know why it's called the cleaving woman. So she is the goddess of childbirth, fire, the hearth, protection. Her sister is the door woman, Uksaka, and she hangs out at the doorway or the threshold to protect the children. And then the other sister, interesting that there's three sisters, is the bow woman. I guess she's in charge of the little baby boys. She takes care of them. And then the sun goddess is Dewe. I don't know how to say goddess of the sun. She is very much was worshipped because she brings the sun. So the idea was in the winter, because they're so far north, there's no sun, right?
Oh, that's right. They have the perpetual
Mhm.
night for periods of time.
And then as spring comes, the sun will show up. So that they viewed during the winter that the sun was sick. So they
Mm.
would give it food and, try to make it feel better. Then the sun arrives. Oh, there she is. And so she melts the snow, lets the lichen grow, which is what the reindeer feed on, which is their entire
Mm.
lives depend on reindeer herding. And she's associated with mental health. So, because you've got the sun, makes you happier, and they would smear butter on the doorposts as an offering to her so she could lick it and feel better, I guess. But that's an example. So now, there's quite a trend for bringing these indigenous stories, and as you said, framing it, because I think for centuries they've been warped by these powers that get flung upon them, whether it's Himiko or Devi, the sun goddess of the Sami, and so stories are coming out of indigenous telling indigenous stories and noting the female centering of it, which I think is very nice.
I think it's awesome. And I'm sorry, I got caught up with wanting to say 3 different things at the same time. One is, it's not that I don't wanna know the male stories, it's just that for so long, it's felt as if it was the male stories almost to the exclusion of female-centered stories,
Well, and I think female stories have been warped, I think, or erased.
which is why I love seeing, like, my younger nephew, he gravitates towards, like, when you're not entirely, he still has plenty of male characters that he's excited about, but I've loved when we've watched some things that some of his favorite characters are the women in
Mm.
these stories. So, right now I'm thinking of The Last Airbender, Avatar: The Last Airbender, and for a while there, like, Katara was one of his favorite characters. You know, though Aang is the Avatar, like, and he loved when the next Avatar, oh, I'm forgetting her name, but anyways, it was a woman. It was a girl the next time, and I think he might have loved that story as much, if not more, And he also loved the earthbender, whose name I'm blanking on. Anyways, I've just loved seeing that just
Mm,
because when we were kids, my nephew had no problem with this, with his favorite character at different points being he'd vacillate. Sometimes it was a guy, sometimes it was a girl, but it didn't matter. And when we were kids, I can distinctly think of like guys getting made serious fun of if, like
mm,
their favorite character had been the woman, especially if it wasn't like, "Hey, I'm in love with her," or whatever.
mm,
"I
mhm.
wanna be her," would have been, like, cause for all kinds of bullying, behaviors, and I it's a change, and I'm
Mhm.
not saying that bullying doesn't exist now, I'm not saying that there aren't people out there being but I at least got to see my nephew enjoy that, like and even doing Halloween, like, he was Belle one year, he was Cinderella another year, he was a mermaid another year.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Mhm.
It was what he wanted to be, and it was Halloween, so why not, And look, he's still growing up in our world. Lately, he's been more manga characters, so it shifted, but, I liked seeing that. I mean, I was the little girl who, as much as I loved Princess Leia, I wanted to be Luke Skywalker with the lightsaber.
When you were talking about, uh, archetypes. So last year I went to Stratford upon Avon because I have some friends in a village nearby. And I had a free night, so I went to the Royal Shakespeare Company theater, and they were doing a showing of um, Somerset Maugham's play, The Constant Wife. And it had the lady from Game of Thrones, the redheaded lady, something Rose, her name is, but anyway, did you see Game of Thrones? Oh, so she was Jon Snow's
She
girlfriend.
played Ygritte.
That's
The
her.
actress
That's
is his
her.
wife.
That's
Yeah.
her.
Yeah, I know
So
who you're talking about.
she was the lead, but it was a small cast, maybe like 6 others. So, and then actually there were quite a famous lady in there as well I've seen on TV. And it was written in the 20s, and and it plays with these kind of archetypes of it's a upper class British married couple, and um it's the usual. So the nosy mother, the daughter, she's perfect. The husband, he's busy, he's like a doctor or whatever. The best friend. And so the wife is a decorator, But you can tell it's at that time when I think women were getting their independence. And so the whole play is about her. They find out that he's been having an affair with her best friend. And it's the sister finds out of the wife, and then she tells the mother, and it's all this stuff. It's a comedy, but and then at the end it turns out she knew the whole time, and and because he was like, oh my god, I'm so sorry, blah, 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 whatever. And she's like, you know what, I knew, and I'm going to go on a extended vacation to Italy, and I might meet someone there. She's kind of teasing him, like, is she going with someone? Is she not going with someone? And he's like kind of tortured at the end of it. But I thought it was such a clever, because she's playing the typical archetype of the good wife, like Penelope in Odysseus, waiting for her husband to come home for decades, sitting there weaving, chaste, honorable, the epitome of womanhood. And the same thing with this Somerset Maugham. Uh, she's constant, right? Uh, Womanhood, fidelity, all this stuff. And in the end, she is just like, I'm out, and you do what you want. And she didn't have a fit. She didn't have a scene. She just packed her suitcase, and it was really well done, very funny. But I think it's pushing what you think, and twisting it at the end to make it like, aha, she knew. She's not what you think, but in a good way. And so that was the
It
20s.
makes me think of the fact that for so long women have been sold this concept of, um, speaking of fairy tales, of this idea of marriage and children, and that's what makes you happy. And yet, in the modern world, when they do sort of mental health analysis of who perceive themselves as the most content, it's single women with no children that perceive themselves as the most content. So, like, I love that twist at the end that you're describing, but I'm like, I don't know whether she would be divorced or not, but she's at least not gonna be responsible for children or a husband on
Eh,
her trip to Italy.
yeah,
Like,
yeah. I mean,
you
she
know
was basically acting like a single woman at the end of
Yeah,
this, and she's like, I'm fine, I'm great.
yeah.
I'm out."
She doesn't have this whole thing of, like, needing him, and,
Nope.
like, I those are some of the other retellings that I love the concept of, like but the other aspect of it is women who because it sounds like she did have a support network with her sister and her
Yes.
mother, and, like do you know what I mean? Like, the other aspect of this whole single women who are content, they do tend to be women who have, whether it's family or friends or it's not that they're isolated. I mean, they might be cat ladies that are hang out at home most of the time, but they have a support network that they are part of. And um I love stories that tell that. I mean, and you've read way more Agatha Christie than I ever have, but I
I've read
feel
every
like
single Agatha Christie.
okay, then you can correct me, but I feel like some of her older women like not married, not responsible for children, but they normally had friends and family and connection to their town and their church. And like,
Oh, yeah, it's
yes, they,
very community. It's a very she wrote a lot about village life, which is a very community-focused, yeah,
yeah. And so
existence.
I'm like, she described women who were, and I'm not talking about they're giddy, laughing all the time or whatever, but content in their world, like living full lives. Like it wasn't this sort of like, oh, I'm not married. I have no children. Like, like which God, I can't remember the book, but it came out when we were in college. Um Backlash might have been what it was
Mhm.
called.
Susan something.
Faludi?
Yeah.
Was that
Yep,
what it
yep.
was? But one of the things I remember is that's the first time there'd been this whole thing like you have a greater chance of, I don't know, dying or something like that than
Yeah.
a child or getting married after the age of 35. As if, like all these young women needed to
Yeah.
stick out and settle for whatever dude was out
Yeah, and
there.
it
And
was like, "Okay,
oh,
fine."
yeah, it was like, okay, fine. But Backlash was literally about how that was bogus numbers, and it was BS. And it was an effort to try and convince young women to like go out and settle and get married. And um, but I was just like, wow, like the number of machinations out there to try and convince women when it's actually men that we're finding who need relationship with a
Yeah,
woman
they
who
do.
lives longer.
Statistically, men that are without a spouse are lonely and die early.
Yeah, and are fundamentally I shouldn't say fundamentally. A lot of them are very unhappy, but single women are normally quite happy. I sent something recently to Katie. I have not checked the science on it, but it was this thing about how men sleep better. I should
Mhm.
clarify this. Heterosexual men sleep better next to a woman, but heterosexual women actually sleep better next to a dog.
And
Um,
that's gross. I just don't like that dog thing. I mean, no.
I, I don't have a dog. I don't sleep with a dog.
I think it's clickbait. I think the idea is correct, like
The idea
statistically,
is about women do better sleeping on their own,
but not the
I think
dog.
is what it's meant to be.
Yes.
But again, people can't get rid of this idea that if you're sleeping in a bed by yourself, you're somehow missing something. So they had to insert this dog
Mm.
concept. And I'm like,
I'm surprised they didn't do a cat.
I mean, yeah, I am too. But one of the things is that I think about is I know people who they do this whole married, very happily married, but they sleep separately because they sleep better separately. And not
Oh,
maybe
yeah,
one
100%.
partner and not another,
Yeah.
but it keeps their marriage going. not sleeping to get I'm not talking about their
Yep.
sexual life. I'm talking about sleep, you know? And I'm somebody who's slept alone pretty much my whole life. I like it. It's great.
Yep.
You know, like, um, so yeah, I feel like so often, whether we're talking myths or fairy tales or folklore, they are things that sort of set the groundwork for this concept of maybe what we're aspiring to, or um, our warnings about what we might need to avoid. And I'm really loving learning that there are ancient ones or older ones that really uplift women, and
Mm.
that there are modern retellings of ones that have come through to us
Mhm.
that refocus it so that women can be the center of a story, of the story. And like I said, my favorite book, starting from age 15, for the longest time, I don't know that I have a favorite one now. I have
Mm.
not done an analysis to figure out what my favorite now would be. But from age 15 to at least probably 30 or so, The Myths of Avalon, which is
Mm.
one such retelling.
It was
Um,
very good. I read it. I read it because you read it, I
yeah,
think.
and that whole centering the women, and I think the other thing was, having grown up Catholic, having these women have a religion that centered women, that uplifted women, that women were the priestesses,
Mhm.
something that really appealed to me.
Yeah.
And still does, still to this day. I'm not saying every part of that story is great. I'm not saying there might not be problematic components. I'm just saying that there was an aspect of it that I found incredibly uplifting. And
Mm.
I am chuffed, happy to see that that sort of, not that one in particular, but the concept
Mhm.
of telling stories that center women, reintroducing folklore and fairy
Mhm.
tale myth in ways that have women be integral part of our cosmology is
Mm.
something that I think is incredibly important.
I
And
agree.
I want to thank you, Katie, because I know nothing about the Shinto or the Sami myths, and getting to learn
Me
something about
neither.
it. Well, I appreciate you learning and then sharing, because it's not the kind of thing that I think I would have come across otherwise. So I
Mm.
really appreciate
No,
that.
I mean, I thought it was a good opportunity for me to, indulge my ignorance. So,
Yeah. And again, for those of you out there, if you've made it to this point and you're listening and you know of some other amazing story, let us know.
yeah, there must be
Even
tons out there, you know.
even if you're just linking to somebody else who's telling one, we're interested. Like, we do watch them. So let us know. We
Yes.
appreciate that. And that concludes our conversation today on
Thank
folklore,
you.
mythology, and fairy tales. Until next time, we'll see you back at KTVG Studio. Bye, all.
Thank you. Bye.